Learning how they lived we know, very little but still explore how it could have been before, of times long past, of peace and war, of crafts and builds to ancient lore, discovering here at Jarrow Hall.
Hello and welcome to the Jarrow Hall Podcast. We're here on a lovely April Sunday morning from Jarrow Hall in the northeast of England to talk about Easter.
Yes, spring has arrived, and for episode 2 of our podcast, we thought we'd talk a little bit about Easter, what that means for our site, a bit about the Venerable Bede and the history of the Easter controversy, which was a big part of our museum. And you may have noticed that Luke, who joined us on the last episode, is not here today. So we are joined by veteran volunteer Ian.
Hello. I know nothing about Easter except Easter bunnies.
But you have been a volunteer here longer than anyone, I think. Are you the longest serving volunteer we have at the museum?
I started just before Jarrow, the original Bede's World, closed. So I was doing a little bit of
2015 or
Jarrow,
thereabouts?
and then I started again when it reopened with Groundwork, yes.
So you've been here throughout, really, since we opened again?
Well, on and off and on, yes.
So Ian does a lot of stuff on site. You have been known to wear the dragon costume a few times, I
I
believe.
have, yes. The feet don't fit and the hat needs adjusting because you cannot see out of it. But yes, I've worn it a few times and I'd recommend not anyone else to wear it. Thank you.
We have had volunteers collapse with heat exhaustion wearing that thing. Is it Saxon the dragon? Is that the
Saxon the Dragon, yeah.
so-
We should probably update the
Was that his name now? Is that
That's his name now,
its
yeah.
name?
Its name. Yeah.
Saxon the Dragon.
We probably should have a risk assessment for wearing the dragon
It probably
suit.
has one by now.
I hope so.
Well, the
Right.
shoes, the boots didn't fit in the first time I wore it. I wasn't particularly fit because I was coming back off COVID. But your thighs, because you had to lift the boot up to actually walk with it and put them down. You couldn't just walk normally. So what I did eventually is I just took the sort of overshoe off and sort of just used the overshoe with your normal shoes and you could walk. It was a lot easier.
Got a newfound respect for football mascots after one time wearing the dragon costume. It is brutal. We did have a staff member once who was wearing that suit who collapsed in the sun. And the wings, of course, you can't fit through the door.
You can't. And the head sits on top of you, but because the actual helmet thing that's supposed to sit on your head doesn't actually fit, it's about 6 inches above your head. The eye hole is also not where the eye hole is, so you've got to sort of look either down or up and like bend over a little bit just to see where you're going. So it was murder, and it was so tight as well on your arms that it was a bit of a sweat box.
Well, like I say, it's not a job for the faint of heart, is it?
Probably important why characters usually have escorts as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
And regular breaks.
absolutely.
People liked it, and the kids loved it.
Kids love it. Saxon the dragon,
I
our
love it.
mascot. Yeah, you've got to have someone like a front of house icon, don't you?
Yeah.
But it is spring, so things are in full flow again here at Jarrow Hall now that we've reopened. Toddler Thursdays are back on. We've got our museum tours and our Age of Bede exhibit that are being led by our volunteer guide, Peter. One of the best free tours around. And I guess we should probably talk a little bit about Easter, shouldn't we? Because one of Bede's big achievements was really settling the Easter controversy. So shall I talk about that for a couple of minutes? Just a quick overview?
Yeah.
Was that the time with him? Obviously, he did a lot of moon stuff and the tides and things, or was it something else?
Yeah, that's right, in the reckoning of time. So a big issue for early Christians was working out when exactly to celebrate Easter. Easter is a tricky one because unlike Christmas, which takes place on a set day, the 25th of December, Easter is flexible. So in the Bible, the crucifixion and the resurrection take place during the Jewish Passover. And that's where the Latin name for Easter, Pascha, comes from. And early Christians, who were Jews formerly, used to celebrate Easter on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, on the same day as Jewish Passover. But very quickly, Christians decided that they wanted to celebrate Easter on a Sunday, the day when Jesus rose from the dead. And there's a lot of
So-
controversy in how to do that, but eventually, in the year 325, the church said everyone is going to celebrate Easter at the same time, and Easter will take place on the first Sunday following a full moon after the spring equinox, the vernal equinox.
That sounds a
And
bit witchy, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? So that sounds okay, but it's quite a complicated system because the equinox is a solar phenomenon. It's when the sun passes over the equator and we move from winter towards summer. And the full moon, of course, is a lunar phenomenon, so it's part of the lunation, the moon cycle. And working out when exactly the equinox is going to happen and when the full moon is going to happen so you can celebrate Easter on the right day is really complicated. At that time, the calendar was slightly different from ours. They used the Julian calendar. So in Roman times, astronomers worked out that the Earth completes its orbit, although they thought the sun orbited the Earth, but never mind, in 365.25 days, which is pretty accurate. A true solar year, though, is 365.2422 days. So the calendar year that we use is about 11 minutes longer than the solar year. Now, you might think 11 minutes, so what? That's not a big deal. But that meant that each year, the calendar year is slightly longer. So by the time we got to Bede's day, the calendars were out by quite a bit. The spring equinox, which was always dated on the 25th of March, was happening around the 21st, and Christians were confused about which date to use for the equinox, and if there was a full moon on the 22nd, well, what do? Do we wait for the next full moon, or do we just celebrate Easter on this coming Sunday? And just to add to the mix, there were about 2 months' worth of other observances that they had to have. They had Lent and Ash Wednesday and Shrove Tuesday and all of that, so they couldn't just wait until the equinox had happened and look at the moon in the sky to work out when Easter was. They had to know well in advance, and everyone had to celebrate it on the same day. So really complicated. You've got different systems that don't line up, and there were so many different Easter tables. There was a 180-year cycle, and an 8-year cycle, and a 48-year cycle, and an 84-year cycle. But eventually, they worked out a 19-year cycle, which ensured that the solar year, the lunar year, and the calendar year all aligned more or less perfectly. And that was the system that was being used by about the 7th century in the West. Now, in Northumbria, where we are, which is kind of far out on a limb in the Christian world, the Celtic Church, or the Columban Church, which had founded Lindisfarne, used an older system. They used a 48-year cycle, and they wouldn't budge on it, even after leaders from the church in Rome told them about the new 19-year system. They wouldn't adhere to it, and it caused a big problem because the King of Northumbria, Oswy, was a great admirer of the Celtic or Columban Church. That's what he'd been raised with. He thought it was perfect. He didn't want to make any changes at all. But his wife, Anflad, whose mother was from Kent, she followed the Orthodox Roman system. And this meant that the king and queen and their friends were celebrating Easter on different days. So the king would be stuffing his face with his friends celebrating Easter, while his wife was still in the middle of her 2 months of fasting and getting very annoyed. Started to cause problems. I mean, you would fall out if you were, on a fast, on a diet, and your partner is absolutely stuffing their face in front of you. So eventually this all came about, and they said, we have to stop this. This is ridiculous. We all need to celebrate at the same time. And it resulted in the Synod of Whitby, where, thanks to Wilfrid, a Northumbrian bishop who was very, very articulate, very argumentative, but who knew his stuff, the Roman side won the day, and we started following that 19-year system. But like I say, it's very complicated, and people couldn't really wrap their heads around it. They knew that this was the right way to work out Easter, but they didn't know why. And monks would, follow an Easter chart with the different calendar dates for each year, but they didn't really understand how it was worked out. And sometimes they'd have to send monks to Rome to learn Computus. And that's obviously a big overhead, and there was no guarantee that the person you sent would be able to wrap their heads around it. So you could still end up in a situation where you're relying on an old set of calendar tables from years ago that you don't really understand. And this is where Bede comes in. So he taught Computus here at Wearmouth Jarrow. His master, Benedict, and Ceolfrith both had been educated in Rome, so they had learned from the source. And Bede was very, very confident in explaining it to his students. So in 725, or thereabouts, he writes one of his biggest works, De Temporum Ratione. We call it The Reckoning of Time. And he goes a bit Carl Sagan in this book, does Bede. So he explains how time is made up of artificial systems, like hours and minutes, which don't really exist. We use them to measure human activity. But then you've got months, which are a lunar phenomenon, the time it takes the moon to orbit the Earth. And we've got days when the Earth itself completes its rotation. Because he knew that the Earth was round. He says the Earth is round like a ball, and it's spinning, and the moon is going around it, and the sun is going around it as well. So we think of people as being flat earthers in medieval times, but they weren't. They were much smarter than we give them credit for. Yes, of course, the sun doesn't orbit the Earth, but no one would know that for almost 1,000 years. So he explains all of this stuff. He explains how to work out where the moon is in its cycle, how to work out when the equinox is. And if you can't wrap your head around it, he provides Easter tables for the next 300 years. So immediately, there is a huge demand for this book across the Christian world, because it's all there. You don't need to send someone to Rome to possibly learn how this stuff works, because Bede has done an amazing job of settling this debate. And it was probably Bede's most popular work in the Middle Ages. I mean, we value Bede as a historian now, but his ability to take really complex ideas and break them down in simple ways that people could wrap their head around was just revolutionary.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's probably one of my favourite facts about Bede. One of the other things, and I mentioned this a little bit in the last episode, was while Bede was doing his work on Computus, he became familiar with a chap called Dionysius Exiguus, a scholar who had worked on the calendar. And that name, Dionysius Exiguus, it sounds really impressive, but it means Dennis the Small or Dennis the Inadequate when you translate it from Latin. And Dennis, when he was translating these Easter tables, he started putting little years by each one, AD, Anno Domini. So he invented this dating system in the year of our Lord, just to help people wrap their heads around which year each Easter date was going to respond to. But Bede loved it, and he used that for all of his histories. And in chapter 66, I think, of The Reckoning of Time, he's got what he calls the Greater Chronicle, where all world events are categorized using the AD dating system. And it's one of the main reasons why we use Anno Domini or Common Era, if you use the newer terminology in the West now, thanks to Bede. And that is it. That is the Easter controversy summed up in brief. But if you do want to know more, come along to Jarrow Hall, and our tour guide Peter will gladly answer more questions on it.
He's very knowledgeable, isn't he?
He was, yeah. And I think Bede wrote his biggest works at the end of his life when he was feeling his age on him, and he was thinking ahead about, well, who's going to teach this stuff when I'm not here? And one of the nice things about The Reckoning of Time is he keeps saying, this is so much easier to explain in person. It's quite hard to do it in writing. But he does an amazing job of it, and it kind of shows his own teaching styles. And he also has really cool, as an aside, some really cool little tidbits like how to count with your fingers. Now, most of us, we can count to 1 to 10 using our hands. We do that as children. But Bede has a method for counting to 9,999 with your fingers.
Yeah, he uses each segment of the finger, a
That's
little bit
right.
like an abacus, isn't it?
Yeah, and like a simpler version is he says you've got 14 knuckles on each hand. So 3 on each finger, 2 on each thumb. And if you think of yourself as having 28 knuckles rather than 10 fingers, you can attempt much more ambitious computations in your head. Or you could add the 10 nails on the end of your fingers to take it up to 38. So The Reckoning of Time is a great book, and I can see why it had greater appeal across Europe than other of Bede's works in the Middle Ages. But it just shows that the breadth of his interest and why he was called Bede Venerabilis, the Venerable Bede, because in coming down on this issue, really the wider debate around Easter was settled. No one was following these old tables. All you needed was a copy of Bede's book, and you could work out how Easter was calculated, and whether you understood it or not, you could just follow the tables for the next 300 years that he had at the end of that. So, fantastic book, and I think one of Bede's greatest achievements.
You should get shares in that. Yeah. What about aside from Christianity and things?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people talk about Anglo-Saxon paganism.
That's right,
and
yeah.
the way they celebrated Easter as well before Christianity came and swept the landscape.
And bizarrely, most of what we know again comes from Bede, because in the Reckoning of Time he talks about the Old English calendar.
Yeah.
And he names the only pagan deities that we know for certain in Anglo-Saxon England are two goddesses that Bede names, Hretha and Eostra. And Eostra's name is what we use for Easter now. So the church is very good at riding on the back of pagan ceremonies and adapting them for its own use.
Yeah, didn't sort of override pagan ceremonies to sort of then bring in their Christian one, so they'd be around about the same time, and obviously then say, well, do this one instead of that one.
Like Yule and Christmas is another good example. There's always been a festival for the midwinter solstice, but you turn it into Christmas, you Christianise it, you make it acceptable in church eyes.
Yeah. It all comes down to the nature at the end of the day, though, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Absolutely.
So was that the Gregorian calendar they're using, or was that because they've had a few calendar changes,
so
haven't
they're
they,
using
throughout the years?
using the Julian calendar.
Yeah, that was obviously
and we switched to
after one of
the
the
Gregorian
Caesars.
one now. And in 1582, because I mentioned the drift, by the time we switched from the Gregorian to the Julian to the Gregorian calendars, they had to lop 10 days off the year just to bring it back into sync with the solar year. Because 11 minutes over 1600 years, it was just so far out.
And what about Bede's calendar now? You said it was for 300 years, but how far would it be out of sync now if you looked at it?
I
Or
think
did they change? Obviously, they haven't really changed that much if it's on the 31st of March.
some Christian groups still, Orthodox Christians, still use the Julian calendar. So I think they celebrate Easter about 15 days or so later than we do. Those of us that follow the Gregorian calendar. But I'd need to look that up. But yeah, the Gregorian calendar is magnificent. Like it just totally deals with the drift that you get between the calendar year and the solar year. And it just does that by changing the rules around leap years. So that when a leap year occurs at the end of a century, you don't count it unless it's divisible by 400. So the year 2000 was a leap year, where the years 1900 and 1800 were not. And that brings the calendar year into something like 0.02 relative to the solar year. So really impressive achievement. And it's no surprise that once we move from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, the rate of in 1582, the rate of scientific and technological advancement just skyrockets, because the best and brightest minds are no longer focusing on trying to sort out the calendar. That's been settled, and we can look at other things now.
So we're talking about Easter and the equinox and things. So one of the things we've got in between the equinox and the solstice, we've got Beltane coming up as well at the end of this month.
That's right, yeah.
So it starts on April 30th and carries through till sunset the next day on May the 1st.
It's always a big deal at Jarrow Hall, isn't it?
It is. We do Beltane very well here. do you know, there's so many places celebrating it. I want to be everywhere at once. There's
It's
all
a
the
shame
different
you're a volunteer
historic
here.
sites. There's all these other sites. They're all having parties, and I'm thinking, I can't do them all. And then, of course, my daughter's got a scout camp the same day. So I'm thinking, well, that's going to be the priority, isn't it?
It's a
So
rough
we're going to
life,
do
isn't it?
scout camps this year. But yeah, so a lot of people know it as May Day, and it's a favourite bank holiday, I think, at least of mine, probably of lots of other people. And we've got a maypole here. We're going to
We do, yeah.
probably use that again. We seem to use it every year.
The
Yeah,
pagan
probably use it
festivals always go down well, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Really popular. I mean, I don't know that much about them, but I tend to talk more about Bede and the Christian side of things. But we have a lot of volunteers. I think you're into like pagan stuff as well, quite a bit.
I have an interest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
As well, she did one for us.
yeah.
I came here with my sister once and the grandkids, and there was 2 reenactors on site, and they were doing like a little bit of food and stuff, and actually dancing around the maypole. So whether that was May sometime, it was quite a nice day. I remember we were dancing around the maypole and stuff. It was enjoyable.
But it just shows that there's a lot of, besides Christian tradition, there's a lot of, secular and pagan traditions around spring and Easter time as well. And it's good that we have a space for all of that here at the museum. I mean, we're certainly big enough as a site to do everything like that. So it's probably one of the best things about volunteering here, I think. It's just that
Absolutely.
there's so much going on, and whatever your interest is, whether you like more sort of orthodox historical side of things, or if you're into alternative pagan witchy stuff, there's something here for you.
Pagan witchy stuff.
Pagan witchy stuff.
Well, it sums it up.
That's as good a descriptor as I can think of.
Yeah,
but,
well, we're jumping over broomsticks one year, and I remember that I've got this lovely photo of my daughter jumping over a broomstick with Margot, who's on the team.
We should do that for a Halloween activity, making broomsticks. Everyone does pumpkin picking. We should have a broomstick making session. I think that would go
I
down
would
well.
like that.
They did one year. They did. I think this was before COVID, but we were making actual broomsticks because
Bring it back. Bring back
Well,
broomstick.
tying into Harry Potter and that, because I was writing Nimbus 2000 on for the kids.
In the dragon costume.
Well, I might have had it on at one time, but it was just obviously obviously just tying into Harry Potter and his broomstick.
I would love to do broomstick making. I'm
I think it's a
all
lot of
about
fun.
traditional and heritage crafts and things. And
Yeah.
I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I would love my own homemade broom.
Watch the space.
Yeah, so back to that, we could talk about maybe the events and things like that are coming up, because we've got loads, haven't we?
We do, yeah. We have got our medieval fair coming up, don't we?
Yeah.
On the 25th to the 26th of May. So we're going to have a big medieval fair with reenactors and knightly combat, and we'll have our own costume volunteers will be here doing living history on site, and we'll even have guided tours taking place in the museum, led by Peter, our resident tour guide. So a lot going on.
Friday 24th, we've got the the Dragon Parade.
Who can forget the Dragon Parade? Were you here for the Dragon Parade last year?
I was, but with us being mainly on reception, I didn't see a lot of it, and I didn't get away much either. But yes, there were. It seemed quite popular, and it seemed the children and people really seemed to enjoy it.
It was. I mean, I came in off the cuff. I might have been hungover, but ended up sort of helping to run the Dragon Parade, and it was one of the best things I've done on site. To be honest, it was fantastic.
We're talking about the history and dates and feast and fasting, arguing over how to calculate when it happens, why Christians celebrate it, why other people might celebrate it. It's all down at the seasons and things for a lot of people.
Yeah.
How did we get the Easter bunny? Where's that from?
I don't know. I think it's just a symbol of new life. It's not something I was too busy nerding out reading it on Bede. I didn't think about where the Easter bunny comes from, but.
Well, if you'd mentioned it, I would have Googled it.
I'm sure someone will let us know in the comments when this goes out, though.
Or
Someone's got to know, right?
I think, wasn't he originally a hare or something like that before he was a rabbit? Because the Romans introduced rabbits, didn't they? But we had
Yes, that's
hares,
right.
yeah, native
Yes,
before
hare is
that.
native to England.
Rabbits
Rabbits
are
weren't,
not, yeah.
supposedly.
So it must be something to do with the fact that hares and rabbits breed, well, proverbially
Yeah.
like rabbits. And that's a symbol of new life coming
Well,
in. So it's a
obviously-
pretty good symbol for Easter, which is all about
Well,
new
you
life.
get
and
the Mad March hare, because that's when the hares, it's like a breeding season, so it's called the Mad March hare, because when hares, the males will fight, and they'll stand up on their hind legs and they'll box each other. So obviously people are watching that and saying, well, Mad March, it's March, Mad March hares and things. Is that when Easter is? Isn't it Easter? When's Easter?
Between March and April,
Yeah,
yeah.
Of course,
so the equinox is between the 19th and 21st of March every year. So you wait for the next full moon after the equinox, and then the Sunday following that is Easter Sunday. And if we were just waiting, like I said earlier, for that to arrive, it would have been much easier to work out. But because they needed to know in advance to do Lent and all of that.
Yeah, Pancake Day is all tied into that, isn't it? Everybody
Yeah,
loves
Shrove
Pancake
Tuesday.
Day.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, why is it pancakes? Why is it pancakes? Isn't it to do with using up all of the ingredients and things like that you've had stashed over the winter? So
I
that
think so. Jules, one of our volunteers, is either nodding her head or wafting the smoke away. So I'm,
Yeah, sitting here. It could
Well,
be
there's-
you in the background.
The magic of Wikipedia is
we don't
Original.
admit to using Wikipedia on the podcast, Ian.
the German Lutherans, that's where the Easter Bunny comes from, originally played the role of a judge, evaluating whether children were good or disobedient in behaviour at the start of the season
oh, there we
of
go.
Eastertide,
It all comes down to controlling the children.
similar to the naughty or nice list made by Santa Claus.
A bit like Krampus.
Well, there we have it. We have, in the course of this episode, worked out where the
So-
Easter Bunny comes from.
Lutherans.
So Krampus and the Easter Bunny both come from Germany.
I would say Germanic. I don't know.
Germanic. that
Folkloric figure and symbol of Easter.
area. Wow. There we go.
Country, Germany.
So I think we're ready for Brunwulf's banter at this stage. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
our experienced Anglo-Saxon expert linguist and bard is now going to take us away with a fact, something related to Easter. We don't know what yet,
We don't know.
but no doubt it'll be fascinating. Take it away, Brunwulf.
The name of Easter is first recorded in Bede's On the Reckoning of Time. In this, he discusses the month Eastermonath, which he says originates from the name of the goddess Eostre. However, Eostre's name is very rare. Even for English, it may be exclusive to the Northumbrians. There are no equivalents in the Norse texts. However, there is an equivalent, a possible one, in Old High German, recorded as Austron, and then later, in the reign of Charlemagne, as the month name Eastermonath. However, this may too have been introduced by Anglo-Saxon missionaries and monks such as Alcuin. However, the name of Easter may be dated to a Proto-Germanic Austro, and even further to a much older Indo-European Husos, whose name is shared with the Latin Aurora, the Greek Eos, and the Indian Ushas, suggesting an Indo-European goddess of the dawn. While the evidence for Easter is quite spare, we do know that this worship in Northumbria is very likely, given that the buildings there are all facing the east, suggesting that they face towards the rising dawn. And Bede's sources may be reliable because he wrote them at a time in which paganism was fading, but still a living memory, both to his parents and to his grandparents. Also at Northumbria, the building known as Building E, which behind us has been reconstructed as a grandstand after the archaeology and suggestions of Brian Hope Taylor, has more recently been reinterpreted, both by Professor Richard North and by Richard Sermon. In this reappraisal, this particular building may have once served as a form of astrological clock or a way of measuring the time based on the shadows of the fence posts. And this building may too have served as a help to Bede in his form of measuring time.
Another fascinating fact from Brunwulf. You can't be had, can you? He's full of good information, like a walking
It's
encyclopedia.
a man of many skills.
So we've got one question this week, and one of our other volunteers, Jules, has thrown us a book suggestion
Yeah.
to do with Easter. So it's called Winters of the World by Eleanor Parker.
Eleanor
I think you're
Parker.
familiar with that, aren't you,
Yeah,
Chris?
I've
So
read
what's
that.
that all about? Because I've never
So
heard of it.
It's a very good guide, really, to the Anglo-Saxon calendar. So it just guides you through the 4 seasons of the year and what festivities were taking place, what pagan festivals were going on, and Christian ones as well, and the kind of work that was being done throughout the year, the kind of agricultural labour that you would find taking place in the different seasons. So it's a very good book, and she actually she refers a lot to Bede in the Reckoning of Time, because we get the Old English calendar, the Anglo-Saxon calendar from Bede in that book. He lists all the names of the months, as well as naming a couple of pagan goddesses. So Winters of the World's a fantastic book, and I think it's one we're going to have to get back in the shop, surely, because it always sells really well. But
I'll
yeah,
have to get myself a copy. That sounds very
Yeah.
interesting.
I'd definitely recommend it. And I think it's a really, as I say, a very good introduction to the Anglo-Saxon calendar.
Yeah. So the question that we've got is, what's your favourite part about Easter? So that's a nice, personal, easy question.
Favourite part of Easter? What would you say yours is, Ian?
Well, obviously the only memories I've got really of Easter is obviously Easter eggs. So I'd say chocolate.
Chocolate is a good one.
Definitely.
good answer,
But
yeah.
not really grown up in a religious type family. But didn't obviously follow, these dates. Just it was Easter, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's Easter, so you
that's the
get
same.
yourself an egg.
For most people
And,
now, isn't it?
My brother always, usually, or the family buys eggs because I know I like a bit of chocolate. So, chocolate.
Chocolate.
Nice.
Solid answer.
I think mine now is the sunshine.
Yeah.
Yeah, the weather turning nice.
Yeah.
'Cause after a long...
Well, it's lovely today,
long
and if it
winter.
continues on,
It just
Oh God,
lifts
it's
your mood.
lovely this
It
year,
makes a
isn't
difference.
it?
Actually, in that book you just mentioned, Winters of the World, she mentions that Lent comes from the word lengther, which means lengthen in Old English, and it's
because of the days.
Because the days are getting longer,
Yeah.
nights are getting shorter, and you get up and it's bright outside, it's not dark. You finish work, it's still light outside. It lifts everyone's spirits, and I think that's probably my favourite thing about Easter as well. And also being off work over the Easter weekend, you can't go wrong with that.
Holidays.
Yeah.
That's funny because just recently it was like 4 p.m. was like sunset, and now just it seems like a week or two later, it's now more 8 o'clock. So you're talking about an extra 4 hours straight away within just a week or so.
Yeah, it happens
It's,
quite suddenly.
I've been asked to just throw in a little bit about the Living History team and what they like to do when we've got events on and things like that. Because over the Easter, they're going to be here a lot.
They are.
I know last time they were in doing an event, it was absolutely fantastic. Kathleen, who leads the Living History, she put a full spread on, and there was a big buffet. And I was fortunate enough to be allowed to eat some. We can't share it with the visitors because of the food hygiene, but we're allowed to share it amongst ourselves. And it was delicious. It was really good.
It's always a good day when the Living History volunteers are down, isn't it?
Yeah, and they do all the heritage crafts and things like that with the tablet weaves and the textiles
Spinning
and things
wool
as
and all
well.
that,
Yeah,
yeah. Nail binding.
And it's so relaxing. Like, I like to come down just for a good day out, just to join in.
There's just something about those crafts. They seem like simple activities, but they are totally absorbing, and you can see why people do them. They're so good for mental health, just to have an activity like that just exercises you.
That's really important, isn't
but in a kind of gentle way. Is that us for this month?
Yeah, I think that's it for today. That's been really interesting today. Thank you all very much. So if you're listening, if you're watching, if you like it, like and subscribe. Do follow us on all our social medias. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Am I missing any, Ian?
Twitter.
Twitter.
Do you
Or
listen to
X.
YouTube?
Is it still called Twitter?
It's now X.
Now, yeah.
We're on YouTube.
And if there's anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes, let us know.
That's it. Do contact us. Bring us your questions. Bring us your interesting facts, suggestions, things like that. Anything interesting, if you want to let us know, just do it. Contact us through our social media channels, or you can find...
I'll leave a comment below.
That's it, yeah.
Perfect. Oh, well, thank you everyone watching or listening. I hope you got something out of that. We certainly enjoyed doing it, and we'll see you again next month.